You are about to experience Jackson Snyder Presents. We will examine the life of our Master Yeshua by discovering his ancestors, family, and friends, by reviewing rare ancient manuscripts, and speaking to those who know him best. From the Vero Yahad at yahad.us. Now experience Jackson Snyder Presents.
The shocking true story behind the Jesus family tomb. But for the sake of my presentation, let's temporarily suspend reality and believe that the Jesus family tomb is the real thing. I don't have time to define all the terms or tell all the history behind what I'm about to present to you, but rest assured, what I'm speaking about is based in fact, not the incredulous presumptions of the Da Vinci Code crowd. You may very easily verify most of what I write and what I read here with simple internet searches, reading Josephus, Philo, or Eusebius, or using the search engine at jacksonsnyder.com, or purchasing any modern scholar's book on the subject. Not an 18th century scholar, not a 17th century scholar, but somebody from the last 10 years, like Robert Eisenman, for example. I have several excellent books listed at www.nevy.us that will help you to understand this better if you need to, or I can offer you references or sources if you're really interested. Just contact me here, Jack at theyahad.com. That's Jack at theyahad.com. Let the story begin, but please note that the following is historical fiction. Our first topic is the sons of Alpha to the temple in Heliopolis. We read in our histories that when Yosef, the son of the famous Yaakov, was raised from the prison to become the administrator of Egypt, he received Asenath in marriage, a priestess of the sun god On. Yosef, as a worshipper of Yahweh, certainly had some influence in Egypt's acceptance of monotheism around 1400 BC. And when Yosef was gone and forgotten, the priests of On brought back the old Egyptian gods and brutally expelled or killed the priestly families, and ultimately anyone who would not worship them. Many of the Hebrews in Egypt used the Nile as an escape route, finding safety far south of the Egyptian border, in Cush, Namibia, and Ethiopia, where some remain to this very day and are known to outsiders as Falasha. Our story begins in the city of Alpha, on the Nile River in what is today called Sudan, just south of the Egyptian border. Alpha is a sanctuary city protected by the Kushite kingdom as sovereign territory off limits to the armies of Egypt, Greece, and later Rome. It takes its name from the fact that it was the first city south of Egypt. Alpha, or Alpha, means first, just like Alpha and Omega means first and last. Let's go to 500 BC. Over the next centuries arises a dynasty among the Alpha Hebrews of the line of Solomon by Menelik, the son of Solomon and the Kandake of Ethiopia, the queen of Ethiopia. These priest kings of the Alpha were unique as they had the power to regulate weather, cast out swarms of locusts, and heal the sick in the name of Yahweh. Over the centuries, the Alpha kings' descendants became known throughout the dispersion of Israel as rainmakers and healers. Their presence and gifts were highly valued everywhere. They became known as the Ben Chalphai, or sons of Alpha. A few of the sons of Alpha are still known today from ancient texts that we can read, such as Honi the circle drawer, or Yehuda the Galilean, or Yaakov and Levi, the sons of Alphaeus in the New Testament. Alphaeus is not a man, but Alphaeus is the name of a place in Cush and a caste of priest kings, and that's important to remember. It's 200 BC. This brings us to the Egyptian city of Heliopolis, where we find a community of Hebrews, many of whom migrated back to Egypt from Cush after the persecutions of King Ptolemy Philopator, about 210 BC. King Ptolemy rounds up all those of the tribe of Yehuda who would not take the mark of the god Dionysius or wear the Greek hat. He had them corralled in the stadium at Alexandria. If they won't give up the peculiarities of their faith, he would murder them all in one of the most creative ways imaginable. He would order the army's 500 elephants to be drug-crazed, then stampeded through the stadium upon the Jews inside. Though Ptolemy attempted the massacre a few times, Yahweh stole the plan from his mind. Yahweh instructed Ptolemy not only to set the captives free, but to commend them. This commendation ultimately led to the Jews gaining permission to rebuild the temple of Yahweh in Egypt and reinstall the legitimate Zadokite priesthood. All this in fulfillment of Isaiah 19:18 through 21, which says, "In that day there will be an altar dedicated to Yahweh in the center of Egypt, and close to the frontier, a pillar dedicated to Yahweh, and this will be a sign and a witness to Yahweh Sabaoth in Egypt. In that day there will be 5 cities in Egypt, pledging themselves to Yahweh Sabaoth, and one of them called City of the Sun." Few today realize that while the priesthood of the Jerusalem temple was being bought and sold, a temple of Yahweh manned by the proper order of Zadokite priests existed in Egypt for 240 years, including the entire lifespan of the Messiah, and that the temple would be in the city of Heliopolis, which means City of the Sun. The announcement of the building of a new temple draws contractors and artisans from all over Africa, especially since this would have fulfilled a miracle that was prophesied in the Isaiah passage I just read. A few of these builders journeyed up from Alpha. Some of them are sons of Alpha, now lay priests with construction skills, who could on occasion still call down rain, cast out locusts, and heal the sick. Our next topic, twins marry twins, Johanna and Yosef, Cleopatra and Cleopas. So it's now about 10 BC, and in Heliopolis of Egypt, not far from the temple of Yahweh, here lives a small community of whose ancestors came up to build this temple, descendants of the sons of Alpha, by which surname they're still known. And they still follow the trade of their ancestors, that is the building business, and that is the tekton of Mark 6:3. Is this not the carpenter? Tekton does not mean carpenter. Tekton means a builder or administrator of building. Well, we get the word technology from that. So when we think of the carpenter in the shop forming little yokes and so forth, the business that Yosef was in was certainly bigger and far more lucrative than that, him being a tekton or technologist. These few families that moved up had been successful enough in their generations to inherit the wealth required to set up business in the new location, and they're blessed by Yahweh and set apart for great things to come. There are 2 sets of twins. Twins married to twins descended from the builders of the temple. Twins were common in their ancestry, and their intermarriage is not uncommon at all among David's descendants, since prophecy decreed a Davidic Messiah to restore Jerusalem, to holiness and order. So those who were of David's kin wanted to remain of David's kin, so they married within their own tribes. One set of twins are named by Eli, their father, in the Hebrew style. They are Johanna and Yosef, surnamed Alfai, A-L-F-A-I. The other set are named by Lebeus, their father, in the Egyptian style. They are Cleopatra and Cleopas, surnamed Alphaeus, A-L-P-H-A-E-U-S. So we have 2 families from the same place with 2 different sets of customs, slightly different, but each as Hebrew as the other, with one set Greco-Egyptian and the other Hebrew-Egyptian, ready to merge and to take on the task of trying to discover their common heritage in Avraham. The surnames Alpha and Alphaeus mean exactly the same thing, just expressed in different languages, one being expressed in Hebrew, the other expressed in Greek. we'll learn later a little more about Alpha and Alphaeus. Yet the uniting of the Egyptian and Hebraic surnames is a sign to both that they have already really been but one, Aleph, from the beginning. Cleopas marries Johanna, and Yosef marries Cleopatra. The double marriage unites cousins and businesses, too. They work together for generations anyway, and they'll need a bigger company if they're going to contend for business outside Egypt, where great building projects are shovel-ready. Herod the Great, so-called, has many great projects going all over Palestine, and it's their intention to be hired for some of them, even if it means pulling up stakes in Egypt and moving back to Bethlehem, their ancestral town of origin. I might make note here that it was not uncommon for a Hebrew to have the name Cleopatra at this particular time, since Cleopatra had recently been the queen of Egypt, and there was still one of her descendants that was the queen of Libya. And there had been 6 other Cleopatras before her in the title of king or queen of Egypt. So that was a very popular name, Cleopatra. Cleopas is, of course, the masculine for Cleopatra. Being of the line of both Dawid and Zadok the priest is taken very seriously. And the sons of Alphaeus, as they are called by most others, are very faithful to their Hebraic roots. Though they've been brought up in the shadow of the Heliopolis temple, the faith of their fathers and mothers never fit well with temple Judaism. What is the purpose of killing animals if one neither raises them nor eats them? The sons of Alphaeus are strict vegetarians. In their religious lives, they find personal prayer enlightening and individual ministry edifying and good deeds more pleasing than either money or sacrifices. Though the Torah remains their law, they're more interested in do's than don'ts. And there's much good to do. Since sons of Alphaeus are contractors, the real work is now done by skilled subcontractors. The brothers-in-law, Yosef and Cleopas, have free time to be spent with family, self-education, and worship. With whatever seed is required within the human heart for a harvest of good works and a pleasing life, it had been planted within them. Hardly is a Torah necessary for such hearts. They would not disobey even if they had never known of it. They simply could not. They love too much. Some people are just born pretty good, with 7 or 8 parts light inside and just a little bit of darkness. After all, these are men and women of legend, worthy of awe and inspirations, priests just as much as in any temple, of a higher priesthood that doesn't require robes and bloody knives, priests who would command weather, reproach plagues, and heal the sick, bred of the seed of good and set apart men and women, set by the Almighty in the midst of an evil world as salt and light, hardly even subject to death. Some said they would live for 1,000 generations. Yet even when they die, it is unto the resurrection of the just. By this time, the ancient title of Alpha, priest, is passing into insignificance, while their new identity is published by the philosopher Philo, the Jew. He simply calls the Alpha priesthood healers, or therapeutoi. Cleopas and Yosef are hardworking yet highly religious healers, and they have been educating themselves all along. They participate in the study of the ancient manuscripts. They can read Coptic, Greek, Aramaic, and a little Hebrew. As a people set apart, they have a tradition of study, weather prediction, and healing through prayer and natural substances. The healers are known for high ethical standards. If necessary, they aid orphans and widows as commanded in Scripture. They see to the welfare of the poor. They take in children when possible, sometimes even women. The money they make through their business, which is considerable now, they place in a common fund to better the community, caring for both the less fortunate and those called to study Scripture. Like me. The more they make, the more they can help. And though he's not very involved with the temple his kin helped to build, Yosef is known in religious circles as Hazadik, Yosef the Just. I doubt that there's one person who's listened this far who wouldn't still enjoy being known as a righteous man or woman. Our next topic, children of Yosef and Cleopatra, who are Johanna, Yaakov, and Yehuda. Twin sons are born to Yosef and Cleopatra, Yaakov and Yehuda. That is, Jacob, also known as James, and Judah, also known as Jude. As for Yaakov, James, Yaakov receives the inherited title Alpha, which designates him as the Aleph, or firstborn of twins. His ancient surname Alpha now has a second meaning. Besides the priest-king idea, he's also the alpha of his twinship, the firstborn. He will become known to historians as James the Just, but to Christians as James, son of Alphaeus, or James the Less, both unfortunate errors contributing to the loss of this historical person's identity. And have his letter to the dispersion published in what is to become the New Testament. Being the firstborn son, Yaakov is set apart for a life of study and ministry, if he will have it. At an early age, he is sent to live among the Essenes, the men of perfect holiness, at Mount Carmel, not far from Nazareth. Though he's sorely missed in family life, his parents know that he will be a gift to Yahweh and the people of Israel. Besides, Mount Carmel is not so far away that he can't return home occasionally. Yaakov will take a significant place in secular history as the founder and leader of the Assembly of Yahweh in Yerushalayim and the overseer of the Nazarene faith explosion in the mid-1st century. That is, the faith that his brother Yeshua was to found. Yehuda, next, is the second of twins and receives the surname Tamah, which means twin. He will become known to scholars as Judas Didymus Thomas, the author of a New Testament letter, as well as what is often called the fifth gospel, that is, the Gospel of Thomas. He is known to Christians as Jude, son of James, in another erroneous translation, or the subject of the song, Hey Jude. Yehuda's fate is quite different than his brother's. As the Didymos twin, the second of twins, he's put to the education of work among the supervisors of the family business. Yehuda will also play a significant role in the Nazarene movement as the torchbearer, that is, the Thaddeus of the movement in Asia as far as India. And then there's Yochana. Several years after the twins, Yochana, a girl, finally comes forth, named for her father's sister, whom she resembles. Yochana is betrothed before she was born to a Levite in Yerushalayim, a descendant of an aristocratic, though waning family. This old custom of infant betrothal was still practiced, though in fact the betrothed seldom ended up in marriage. And 1,000 years after her birth, she'll be known only by one name, Joanna. What may never be known, except maybe to me, is that Joanna and her Levite husband-to-be are the grandparents of a Roman emperor's adopted son, Flavius Josephus, the historian. And though a great joy will come to the family of Yosef later, for now there is mourning, for Cleopatra does not live through her daughter's birth. Death in childbirth is very common at this particular time, as is death from anything. Life expectancy by one source is only 29 years. It seems that Yahweh would prevent such happening among the righteous, though we are told that the rain fells trees on both sides of the river. In Ecclesiastes 11:3. Yosef is a widower, and he plans to remain unmarried. His children all attended to, his beloved gone. He will live a free man in a fettered world, choosing his work, redeeming his time, continuing in righteousness. But something is bound to happen in his life that will change his outlook entirely. Our next topic is the twins of Cleopas and Yochana, whose names are Shimon and Shalome. When Yosef married Cleo, Cleopas also married Yochana, Yosef's sister. It's not surprising that this couple also had twins, who also have a set of twins, Shimon and Shalome. By the way, did I mention Yosef and Cleopas were distant cousins? I think I did. Marriage within the extended family was expected and blessed in those days. Shimon, as the firstborn, like Yaakov, is meant to enter the Essenes for his education. Unlike Yaakov, Shimon is too distracted for a life of utter holiness, and he rebels. In his early years, he becomes known for rebellion and Israeli nationalism, gaining him the surname, the Zealot. But soon Shimon falls in love and settles down in the village of Cana in the Galilee, which gives him yet another surname, the Shimon of Cana, or the Canaan, setting him apart from thousands of other Shimons in the territory. His significance in the Nazarene movement is that he becomes the overseer of the movement after the execution of his cousin Yaakov in 62 AD. He will be the editor of a short book of great influence among Christian scholars of the 20th century. The book, The Teaching of the 12, also known as Didache, still part of the canon in the Ethiopic Orthodox Church. Secular history will allot Shimon 120 years, with oversight of the movement for 40 years. Then there is Salome. Born into a community of healers, and unlike her more traditional cousins in Israel, Salome becomes a very well-educated woman who chooses her own husband on the basis of love and faith. Two notices about Shimon's twin sister Salome survive, both of which are quite important. As an icon in the Nazarene movement of Egypt, history has been written that Yeshua and Salome were very close, he making his home in her house, dining at her table, and discussing matters of spirituality, experience, and even mysticism. The second contribution of Salome is a hymn book that's caught the interest of 20th and 21st century scholars and religious people. The book has become known as the Odes of Solomon. Egyptian and Syrian literature tells us that Salome sang these hymns, and anyone who cared to read my translation of them will have no doubt afterward that Salome, who loved Yeshua, wrote this work, not Solomon. Like her sister-in-law, Cleopatra, Yochanan survived the birth of her twins for only a short time. She too succumbs to the birth of two through a birth canal barely large enough for one. Though Cleopas grieves, he realizes he can't raise the children alone. It's not long before his neighbor's daughter employs herself by taking care of Shimon and Salome. Their father notices this girl, who's named Mariamene in the Greek style. It's not long before Cleopas begins paying attention to her, and after not that much longer, they marry. Or their father notices this girl who's named Maria in the Latin style. It is not long before Cleopas begins paying attention to her, and not that much longer, they marry. You can pick either path A or path B. There. The next topic is Heliopolis to Netzaret, Cana, and Kokba. We've watched this family go through several migrations and surnames already, from Cush to Heliopolis, known as Banim Alphay, Therapeutics, finally Essenes. For generations, these families have been influenced by their submersion in Egyptian and Greek culture under the Ptolemies. But in these days, close to the fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy of the advent of Messiah, both Yosef and Cleopas abandon Greek names and give their children strictly Hebrew appellations. As Alphay, they would still heal and call down rain. As temple builders, they can still prove they have served Yahweh and his people, Israel as well. As therapeutoi, they retain the learning of contemporary science, mysticism, and medicine. As Essenes, they take the best of each transitional shift while they abandon the worst of all, now seeking out their ancient Hebraic roots even as they are working and traveling in business together. Matthew 9:17.
Hello, this is Jackson Snyder. We're going to take a little break now to present some very important messages, but we will be right back here on Hebrew Nation Radio.
scriptures, histories, and companions of the first Nazarene. We will uncover the long-hidden ancient books, and we will read them. We will discover the intimate stories of our ancestors, the Nazarenes, and we will recount them. And those brave souls who established our faith, people like the brothers and sisters of our Savior, we will name them, many for the very first time, and they will be strangers no more. This is your host, Jackson Snyder of the Netzari Yahadim. For more information about the first Nazarene, join us at theyahad.org, THEYAHAD.org. Until then, we hope you will enjoy each broadcast of the first Nazarene. Welcome back, my friends. This is the continuation of the shocking true story of the Jesus Family Genealogy. There's a fellowship of Essenes of one sort or another in every city and town in Egypt, Palestine, and Syria, so there's no lack for like-minded friends in their travels. Too much righteousness for men born of women? No. These men are Davidides, that is, David's bloodline, and raised up by Yahweh for important historical events. These crude Herods are the greatest builders in history. There's no lack of work. In fact, Sepphoris is to be rebuilt as the administrative capital of Galilee. Yosef, Cleopas, Yehuda, and Shimon and company are easily able to acquire long-term employment rebuilding the amphitheater in the center of the city of Sepphoris. It is to be a showplace, and Herod is sparing no expense. Galilee is dangerous for anyone, so the families are careful to choose where they will reside. They have kin in Sepphoris, Joachim and his wife Hannah, and their daughter Maria. With Joachim's help, Yosef and Cleopas will move their families to 3 villages on the outskirts of Sepphoris. Those are Nazareth, Kokba, and Cana. Nazareth, Kokba, and Cana. Many builders are moving to this area, and homesteads are in short supply, but Joachim relates that there's a detachment of Roman soldiers posted in these towns, and they will be safe there. Now let us reconnoiter for a minute. We must have Yosef and his son Yehuda and daughter Johanna in Nazareth. Nazareth, or Nazareth, means the shoot or the branch. Makes us think of Isaiah chapter 9 and the prophecy of the branch. They're there with his son Yaakov at Mount Carmel, which means harvest. Yosef is a widower, his brother-in-law Cleopas, and with his young wife Mariamene, and the twins by his former marriage to Johanna, Shimon, and Shalomeh. They all settle in Cana, which means, of course, zeal. Many of the Hebrew workers that came with the family from Egypt live in Kokba, also known as the place of the star. And here's a new character, Maria, the daughter of Joachim, a distant cousin of the sons of Alphaeus, lives on the outskirts of Zippori, where she was born. Maria, we would know as Mary, the Virgin Mary. This brings us to our next section, Maria and Yosef. And it being about 1 A.D., we leave the business behind for a while, recognizing that it got the family of the Jesus family tomb to Galilee, and Yosef, the widower, to Maria, the young woman. We already know the story of Mary and Joseph, but did you know that it was the duty of an Essene of Yosef's type, that is, a righteous one, or a Zadik, to accept betrothal of the young Maria, a kinswoman placed in Yosef's care through the command of one of the manuals of discipline, as understood by her ailing parents? Yes, there was an obligation that Yosef needed to meet, and that obligation was Maria. Essenes of all sects adopt children. They help the poor. They even marry women to give them the benefit of a family name and eventually the Essene treasury when they die. Some Essenes of means took the concept farther by multiplying wives and adopting several orphans. The reason an Essene might do this is not because of sexual desire, but because he greatly loves and is burdened with the troubled ones he sees and thus he desires a large and happy family, whether he participates in that family or not. There are some righteous men I know who are like this. If it were for any other reason, Yosef certainly could not have made it through the 3-year ordeal of joining the order, nor would he be judged righteous enough to continue in it. The Essenes are very strict in regards to obligations. Some Essenes, especially those who were considered priests of the Alpha, or of Melchizedek, or of Phinehas, depending on the sect, remained celibate and increased their numbers by taking youth into their common discipleship programs. Yosef was such a man, a righteous man. The book of Matthew clearly tells us he's an Essene priest by describing him as a Zadik, and that's what they called their priests, a just or righteous one, a Zadik. Now, at the ripe old age of 42, he's expected to do his duty by accepting the betrothal, and he does. Our next section is Yahshua and Yahshua in Zippori. Now, let's understand Maria's son, who is named Yahshua by order of the Malach, or angel of Yahweh. Maria is seen as pregnant long before her betrothal, and once the son is born, the religious people consider him among the Mamzarim, that is, one who is born in unusual, often sinful circumstances. No longer in Egypt, where such discrimination was no longer practiced, a Mamzer child was not allowed in the synagogues of the Pharisees, which were so numerous. Thus Yeshua was not permitted an education with the rest of the youth. Yahshua, being a firstborn of the line of Yehuda and himself a scion of David, would work with his older brother Yehuda in Sepphoris until the age of 12, at which time he's committed to the care of his other brother Yaakov among the Nazarene Essene seminarians at Mount Carmel. Yahshua's lost years would be in the company of Nazarene Essenes at Mount Carmel, and wherever the elders there bid him to go. These were the priests with which he had discussed the scriptures at age 12, certainly not the Sadducees, but the Essene priests, marking the end of his apprenticeship in construction and the beginning of his education in the priesthood. Then, at the age of 30, in accordance with the manual of discipline of his order, he was elected elder, at which time he could go forth into whatever his specialty had become. When he came back to Nazareth, to the synagogue of the Pharisees, he was called on to read the Haftorah, since he was undoubtedly dressed as a teacher and recognized as such. But when his actual identity was discovered by the townspeople, he again became just that mamzer of ignoble birth that they had banned years before. Our next subject is Yochana and Matya Lebeas Alphaeus. Now let us jump ahead a decade. About this time, Yochana, the daughter of Yosef, finally marries her intended, he being Matya ben Matityahu. He's from an aristocratic family of Jerusalem, but his family fortune is waning, and it's Matya's intention to get it back through his work as a Levite. Matya becomes a tax farmer in the bustling city of Caesarea or Caesarea. Also, the first of a set of twins, according to Mark 2:14, Matya Halevi becomes a rich young ruler of the Jews. Yochana and Matya have children, one of whom takes on the family name Matityahu. A generation later, in 37 CE, Yochana has the privilege of naming her second grandson after her own father, that is, Yosef. This same Yosef becomes responsible for much of what we know of these times, for later he would be the governor of Galilee, fight the Roman Emperor Vespasian, and become adopted by him as Flavius Josephus. But not so long before, his grandfather Matya was the secretary scribe for the Nazarene movement spearheaded by Yahshua HaMashiach. Although many wonderful stories were to be told about him long after he was gone, Matya was content to stay close to Yochana and Yaakov, his priestly brother-in-law, until Yaakov is gone. Shimon bar Cleopa, Matya's new pastor when he falls asleep, lays him in the family tomb and scratches his nickname on an ossuary. Next we have Yehuda and Shimon. While the eldest brother, Yaakov, is studying Hanok, or Enoch, and becoming James the Just now in a Jerusalem house, his twin, or Toma, Yehuda, is studying current political events with Yochanan, an Egyptian Essene of the Damascus school. Yehuda the Egyptian talks about Yochanan with his father Yosef, the teenager Yeshua, along with Cleopas and Shimon bar Cleopas, all of which are, as we know, Egyptians. As they walk the 3 miles to work each day, to the theater in Zippori or Sepphoris, the place where the youth Yeshua learns all about hypocrites by watching the actors rehearse there. The double cousins, Yehuda and Shimon, as the strong men of nationalistic fervor, are lured into the Zeal for the Law movement, also known as the New Covenant of Phinehas, according to Numbers 25, 6 through 13. The goal of this secret society is to bring about a theocratic Israel. Although there are many violent movements in these days, this Essene wing of the covenant promotes passive resistance against the occupying Romans and Herodians long before it was in style. Although Yehuda, Toma, and Shimon are both married with children, Shimon's marriage in Cana becomes one of the most famous ever known, even more so than the legendary marriage of the son of Tovit. Yehuda Toma is Shimon's best man, or architriklinos, the manager of the wedding feast. For this, Yehuda will receive a nickname from the Roman soldiers assigned to watch the party. Yehuda, Jude, who is continually keeping the torches lit from table to table and scurrying between them, becomes known as Thaddeus, Latin for the torch god, or the torch bearer. But that's another story we'll get to later. The cousins find themselves, as descendants of King David, pushed up to the forefront of the Phinehas New Covenant movement. And now a great event is planned as a show of solidarity, a reverse exodus in which all covenanters walk east through the city of Tiberias and out of Palestine altogether, into the desert of Perea for a week-long camp meeting. Tens of thousands march out, with Yehuda and Shimon and even the younger Yeshua leading the Cana to Nazareth march. This kind of march would be called a strike today. So isn't that part of what Shabbat is? A strike against secular commerce? Of course it is. The Roman general in Tiberias doesn't take to the march very well. It causes a major work shortage. So the general takes his armed divisions out to the desert, surrounding the campers. He moves in and beheads the purported leaders. Yeshua and his half-cousin Shimon bar Cleopas of Cana escape, along with about 400 others, but Yehuda the torchbearer, son of Yosef, doesn't return. His body is not found. His whereabouts is a mystery. The bulk of the dissenters are sold into slavery. This would be the final peaceful demonstration against Greek and Roman authority, and it made a great impression upon the young Yeshua HaMashiach. Besides his wife, Yehuda leaves behind an infant child whose name is Yehuda bar Yehuda. Our next section is Yosef and Yosei. Grief over the death of his son, with whom he had worked closely for many years, also takes Yosef's life at the age of 54, leaving behind his young Essenic wife, Maria, his eldest son, Yaakov, who is now in Jerusalem, Yeshua, his son by adoption, and his youngest son and namesake, of whom this is the first mention, Yosef, which means little Yosef, the legendary naked boy in the sheet. Next we talk about Yeshua. Now the Nazarene Essene teacher of Mount Carmel, a Nazarene that is, 30 years old, does a manly deed by adopting his nephew, Yehuda bar Yehuda, who's 4 years of age. His brother, Yehuda, has disappeared and is presumed dead. As a Zedek after the order of Melchizedek, Yeshua would never be married, nor have marital relations, yet adoption is the right thing to do on behalf of his brother. When his mother tells him he's too young to give his name to his nephew, Yeshua says to her, "Woman, who is my mother? How old art thou?" Yeshua continues to aid children, allowing all children to come unto him. Yeshua also continues to maintain a close relationship with his younger brother and only kin, Yosei. would like to follow him like the teenage disciples do, though he's too young to do as a man does. So Yeshua takes Yosef into the upper room of David's tomb, right next door to Yaakov's home in Jerusalem, and there teaches Yosef, preparing him for baptism the next morning and discipleship after. As a Nazarene Essene, Yeshua understands his community of brothers, sisters, and children to be family, but he supports his greater family financially and spiritually also, even as they all support his ministry. Of the people watching Yeshua from a distance when he is crucified are three women: Maria, his mother; Maria, wife of Cleopas; also but farther away is Mariamene of Magdala, who is known as Yeshua's companion in many of the ancient writings. In histories outside of the canon, Mariamene Magdala is the sister of the apostle Philippos. Note that both of them have Greek names. Mariamene of Magdala is named after two Maccabean queens, both of which were married to Herod and also murdered by him. Nevertheless, her name, Mariamene, means something like we might say, Darling Marietta. Her name is famous at this time. The mene at the end of the name Maria is a compliment not unlike the Malach of Yahweh gave to the mother of Yeshua when he said to her, Kek keratomene, which means something like, my darling one, full of grace. Yahweh is with you. Yeshua's younger brother, Yosef, is right beside the stake with his mother now. To Yosef, he says, look at your mother. To Maria, he says, look at your son. As Maria and Mariamene tearfully look on. Soon they must all migrate away to obscure, faraway places, some back to Egypt, some as far as Halphe, others to the backwaters of Europe, and even Great Britain. The next section is back to the tomb. Now, before we get to the so-called tomb of Jesus, I must make a few remarks. First off, the DNA was tested from the remains of the bone box marked Yeshua ben Yosef and Mariamene e Mara. Then, whatever other human remains found in the Jesus family tomb were buried in a common grave in 1980. Ossuaries, or bone boxes, were employed in the first century. They were used over and over and over again for as long as 100 years. Whatever remains were in them were not certainly or necessarily those of the names inscribed on them. There's no telling what DNA material was soaked out of them, and it's no wonder that the DNA tested was found to be of unrelated individuals. Unfortunately, this was the filmmaker's only proof that one of the boxes belonged to Mary Magdalene. She was obviously not related to Yeshua, they say. Who else could it be? Next, let us be reminded of the story of Yosef of Arimathea, that he secured his family tomb well in advance of his death, just as many today make funeral arrangements long before. We see that in Matthew 27:60. In my story, Yaakov HaZadik purchased the family tomb, located in the modern-day Talpiot region, and right beside the tomb of Dawid, where they found the Messianic seals. All this is in exactly the same region. Messianic seals, house of Yaakov, or James, the upper room, and the family tomb. Yaakov HaZadik, James the Just, became a well-established priest in Jerusalem. He was the head of the assembly of Ebionite and Nazarene Essenes there, and he worked for a living as a paid priest of the order of Melchizedek in the assembly of Yahweh. And we have James' history right up to his assassination in 62 AD, which we'll talk about on another recording. The James ossuary or bone box disappeared in 1980. And it turned up again in 2002 or 2003, and has since been proven by patina analysis that it came out of the same tomb. His bone box is labeled Yaakov, son of Yosef, brother of Yeshua. I have no doubt whatsoever that the James ossuary is authentic, although there have been plenty of propaganda saying that it isn't. Let me say right here and now that the James ossuary has been authenticated. There's no doubt that it is exactly what it says it is. And I have no problems with the tomb being authentic either. Who else could it be but the Yahshua family? Let me go on a little discursion now. In considering the Netzari or Nazarene teaching of the standing stone and the standing man, which you won't know about this unless you've read the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles, which I published if you'd like to get that. And you'll learn all kinds of doctrines from the first Nazarenes that have been lost through Christianity. We're to the point of speaking of James the Just, who's, of course, my favorite character because we know so much about him from so many different sources. Besides Paul, no other character is so highly attested. And here's some little-known facts about the brother of Yahshua, who was also his successor. Yes, I'm speaking of the brother of Yahshua Messiah, James Yaakov, surnamed Alphaeus, or James the just man, that is Hazadik, priest after the order of Melchizedek. Here are just a few things we can know about Yaakov, who's called James. If you want to know where I got this, just ask or look it up yourself. James was never named James. That is King James' name. James' name is Yaakov or Jacob, like the patriarch. James and Paul had a serious altercation on the temple steps before Paul's conversion. James had his legs broken by a temple guard, which resulted in a mass migration of believers out of Jerusalem. James was known to have knees like camels, ostensibly from praying for the sinners of Israel. James was known as the pillar of Israel, and if that pillar were to break, the entire land of Israel would be destroyed. Now, this is what the people believed. James was a successor to Jesus, Yahshua, in the Yahshua movement, not Peter, not Kepha. The disciples asked Yahshua, "Who will lead us, since we know that you will leave us?" Yahshua replied, "From wherever you happen to be, go to Yaakov Hazadik, James the Just, for it is for his sake that heaven and earth came into being." This is found in the Gospel of Thomas and echoed many other places. Yahshua told the disciples before his death that they should go to Yaakov, to James. Yaakov was executed by Caiaphas' nephew at the temple during the Passover of 62 AD, thrown down from the parapet, 30 or 40 feet. James prophesied his death in James 5:6. "You have condemned, you have killed the just one, and he does not resist you." Yaakov James' death, according to a contemporary, resulted in the destruction of the temple in 70 AD because of the uprising against those who brought him to his death. Civil war came, and then the Romans came. James' burial box or ossuary has been in custody for almost 30 years. And as I said before, it's judged authentic. The ossuary is inscribed with the words Yaakov bar Yosef Akwid de Yahshua. In churchy language, that's James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. The epistle to the Galatians by Paul includes a line-by-line refutation of the epistle James by James. One top school of scholarship has proven that James wrote some of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Shouldn't this guy get some mention in Sunday school class? One scholar has it right when he says that knowing James is as close as you can get to knowing the historical Jesus. So you don't believe me, but what if these things are true? If we sort through and learn the circumstances of Yaakov's life, think of how much closer we might get to Yeshua, the Ben Adam, the son of Adam. Many people go to the Holy Land because they want to walk where Jesus walked. Well, that's well and good, but before us we have a brother, or if you please, half-brother, about whom we can learn much. And seeing as how, in very fact, Yaakov was his brother's successor, consider how close we can get to the Savior right here at home. When I study the life of Yaakov, James, I feel very close to the other man of Galilee. Now consider, Yaakov and Yahshua had other brothers, and nephews too, and we know something about them. We know a lot about the family, if only we would learn it, if only those who are our teachers would show us. Think of what we could learn. Think of how much better we could know him.
This is your host. Thank you for listening. I hope you have enjoyed our variety show, Jackson Snyder Presents. This is a presentation of the Vero Essin Yahad in Vero Beach, Florida. If you would like more information about today's broadcast, email jackson@HebrewNation.net or visit HebrewNationOnline.com. Until we meet again, may Yahweh keep you safe and close to home.